everyone, welcome back to Lifting the Lamp. I'm Frater Eleftheria, and if everything goes to plan, you'll be watching this on Easter Sunday, so happy Easter everybody. And I wanted to do a topic which was relevant to Easter and the mysteries of Easter, but things have happened in the world that again I need to respond to. Once again, things which are not supposed to be headlining are headlining, and they're things that are related to esoteric topics, such as what I cover on this channel. So I have to respond to them, and I have to put in my 2 cents. And today's discussion is going to be on the comments by JD Vance recently that have blown up the internet, that UFOs are in fact demons or demonic in nature. But before I go on to that, I just want to give you an update on how everything's going with my book and my mailing list. So if you're new to this channel, I am publishing a book in the next few weeks, which is going to be, a big corpus of spiritual wisdom that I have received from doing a number of rituals over the years, and I'm publishing that very soon. And I needed to do a bit of preparation of myself before I was ready to publish that, and that preparation is now complete. So we're entering the final stages of promoting the book before it is released. As part of that final preparatory stage, I have begun the counting of the Omer as of yesterday from the recording of this video. But after I've done that, everything will be in place for the book to be published. So we're very close, and if you want to be updated on when the book is released, please subscribe to my mailing list. I will leave a link in the description below. A lot of people already have subscribed to that, but it's still growing and it's not too late for you to get on board. So I encourage you to subscribe to my mailing list. It's a lot better for me telling you what I'm getting up to in the future than YouTube is, because I get censored on this platform. If anything's problematic, if anything paints Christ or Christianity in too much of a positive light, it'll get buried by the algorithm. So join my mailing list instead. Now that that's over, let's talk about what JD Vance has been saying recently. So JD Vance has made these comments recently about UFO disclosure, saying that he's looked into the topic and he believes that it's demons that are ultimately responsible for the phenomenon that we call the UFO phenomenon. And, people in the Christian right space, in mainstream discourse, such as Michael Knowles, have jumped on this and said, see, I told you so, it's all demons. So it's something that's entered the popular consciousness. And it's a very simplistic view, actually, of the phenomenon, and it's got a lot of problems, which I'll explore today. But first of all, I think it's worth looking at who is JD Vance? How did he become the vice president? What's his background? Any truth to his claims? And what sort of a religious framework might he have that has led him to reach this conclusion? So let's start with the first point. Who is JD Vance anyway, other than a hilarious internet meme? Obviously the vice president under Donald Trump. Before he was the vice president under Trump, his biggest claim to fame was that he was a protege of Peter Thiel. Thiel is of course the co-founder and chair of Palantir, and he's also very outspoken about religious topics. He infamously did a lecture series recently on the topic of the Antichrist, believes literally in the fulfillment of the Christian eschatological account of what will happen in the end times, including the rise of the Antichrist. And he sees his role at Palantir as like preparing the world to resist that by counterintuitively doing the very thing that the Antichrist is supposed to do according to the Christians. Anyway, it doesn't make sense to me. The point is, he's very fascinated in evangelical Christianity, at least as a tool for power, if nothing else. And JD Vance is his protege, and Vance is now in the White House as the VP and is repeating this line about UFOs equals demons. So undoubtedly he's hooked into some kind of religious interpretation of things that are out of the ordinary. He's very much in allegiance with the apocalyptic cult of Christian fundamentalists who have taken over much of the right within the American establishment. These are the same people who are trying to bring about the second coming at the moment by starting the war with Iran. I've done extensive videos on that in the past on this channel, so I won't revisit that now. But this is the force that we're dealing with behind the scenes. And if you look into the interactions that the US government and institutions within that have had with the UFO phenomenon, it becomes clear, or at least very likely, that there's no settled opinion on what is behind this. But there's a lot of different schools of thought, competing factions within that space with a different idea of what is ultimately behind it. And one of those factions is deeply, deeply religious in their outlook. And it's likely that Vance has been briefed by this particular faction on the UFO topic. I'm talking, of course, about the Collins elite. The Collins elite are basically Christian fundamentalists embedded within the deep state who have control over assets that are involved in UFO-related activities. They formed in the middle of the 20th century, and they seem to be centered around the belief that Jack Parsons, the infamous rocket scientist and leader within the OTO in America, opened a portal to another dimension during his infamous occult working, the Babylon working, which he engaged in with L. Ron Hubbard. And the Collins elite note that the explosion in UFO sightings that directly followed after that event could indeed be linked. So they hypothesized that the UFOs are extra-dimensional beings that were invited here by Jack Parsons when he opened his portal during the Babylon working, and more specifically, they are demonic entities. So I'm relatively new to this idea of the Collins elite, but there's tons of other videos out there that you could watch to inform yourself on them. But long story short, the UFOs equals demons theory is by no means new in the UFO discourse. It's been entertained by very powerful interests within the US government and the deep state and the military apparatus for decades now. And now with figures like Vance making the comments that he's made, it's a view that is being increasingly open to the public. So what's my own opinion? Is there any truth to this claim that UFOs are in fact demons? The first thing we need to consider is that there's two big interpretations of what is behind UFOs, or UAP, not necessarily mutually exclusive. There is the nuts and bolts approach, which says that they're technology built by physical extraterrestrials from another planet somewhere. And then there's this other view that they are in fact spiritual entities, and that they can be considered in modern scientific terms as extra-dimensional beings. And much of the stories of fairies and angels and demons is actually due to these extra-dimensional entities making an appearance. And now we interpret them as UFOs. And so within that extra-dimensional theory is where this view that they are demons is situated. And I've been looking very deeply into this particular point of view since June of last year, when Matthew Brown made that post on X. Suddenly, because of that post, the esoteric world and the UAP disclosure world started to talk to each other like never before. It was quite a thing to witness, and me in my position, I had to quickly become knowledgeable on the area where those two worlds overlapped. Namely, the theory that beings ultimately behind the UFO phenomenon, or at least a part of the UFO phenomenon, are spiritual in nature. There is a theory put forward by the likes of Chris Bledsoe and Diana Pasolka that the UFOs, or at least a subset of them, particularly the light orb UFO phenomenon, are in fact angels. That the appearance of these orbs and their activities matches the description of angels in the Bible and as recorded in the lives of the saints. And I've done a whole video about that, which I'll link in the description below. So that's some of the research that I've been doing over the past months, and I've also been gathering my own data, becoming aware of a number of eyewitness accounts in which a UFO, particularly of the light orb variety, appears to a person right after they've done an occult ritual to summon an angelic being. And this is the same kind of magic that Jack Parsons was messing around with during the Babylon working, not necessarily in the way that it was intended, but it was the same form of magic. So there is some truth in what I've been able to gather. There is some truth to the claim that at least some UFOs are, in fact, what we might describe as spiritual entities or extra-dimensional entities, which in the distant past have been interpreted as angels. And so I'm talking about benevolent angelic beings here. But that's not what Vance and the Collins elite are saying. They are calling these things demons. Quite the opposite. So why is that? What accounts for this difference? Well, some of it has to do with the fact that some of the encounters that people have with light orbs are not as benevolent. I've been very lucky. Chris Bledsoe, for the most part, has been very lucky in that regard. But it actually comes down to a more fundamental question than that. And that is the question of theology and what theology people have as an interpretive framework for the UFO phenomenon. So let's explore that some more. Why are they called demons? Well, as I've said, not all experiences with the light orbs are as positive as mine have been. In fact, I have a friend who, when she was younger, was chased through the forest by one of these light orbs and she feared for her life. So I just want to acknowledge that I know that not all light orb experiences are necessarily positive. And there's clearly some moral ambiguity in the phenomenon. Sometimes something that gives us a positive experience looks very similar to something that gives us a negative experience. Case in point, the light orbs. And the reasons for this remain largely unknown, no matter what anyone might say. But religious people, such as JD Vance and those surrounding him, don't like sitting in uncertainty. They like to have simplistic, black and white answers to everything in life, and the fundamentalist Christian religion is there to provide those answers. How convenient. We have to look now at the church's position, official position, on demons. And what is a demon? What are the different ways that it manifests? And this applies equally to the Catholic Church as well as to more Protestant variations, probably the Orthodox Church as well, but I must admit I'm not as up to speed on their views on demons. But the Church's position on the origin of the demonic world is that demons are in fact fallen angels who followed Lucifer when he rebelled against God in heaven. And because they were originally angels, even though they now belong to the realm of evil, they can appear in their original angelic form to deceive human beings into thinking that they're giving them a message from God. Think Anatar from Lord of the Rings. So, for this reason, spiritual apparition that a person encounters, particularly if it gives them communications or downloads, particularly if it occurs in a spiritual framework outside the narrow, rigid belief structure of Christianity, is assumed to be a demon, even if it presents itself as an angel. And well, if that's true, then I guess I'm screwed. I've got an entire book full of communications from angels, and that's coming soon. That's going to be released soon, so the Christian fundamentalists are going to absolutely love me. But anyway, there is this clear and very rigid black and white resistance to anything which presents as any kind of spiritual phenomenon outside of a very strict, religiously mandated framework. And there's a view that anything like that is demonic. Anything that is a spiritual phenomenon which I don't understand is demonic, basically. So where did this very narrow-minded view come from? It can all be traced back to the interpretation of a couple of key passages in the New Testament, the letters of Paul, of course. One is 2 Corinthians 11, verse 14, where Paul talks about how Satan can transform himself into an angel of light. And the other is Galatians chapter 1, verse 8, which reads, "But though we or an angel from heaven preach any other gospel unto you, let him be accursed." Both of these verses in the letters of Paul were spoken by Paul in a specific context where he was rebuking so-called false teachers or Christian teachers who were rivals to St. Paul, who had a different interpretation of the gospel to him. There was, in fact, a lot of diversity of opinion within the early church, and Paul was in the midst of this, trying to establish himself as having an exclusive claim to authority. Not only this, but Paul's claims to spiritual authority, as the one who knew about Jesus and what his life represented, were much weaker than a lot of other people who were apostles, who were Christian preachers at the time. So, for example, he never knew Jesus, unlike many of the people who were his contemporaries, yet he claimed to know him better. All he had was a personal revelation, which can be contested. He taught things which fly in the face of what first century Judaism would have been understood as at the time, and much more resemble something like the cult of Bacchus or the cult of Mithra. And of course, he was an enemy of the church before he miraculously converted. So, understandably, people were saying, who is this guy? Who invited this guy? Why does he think that he can come here and tell us these things? And I would argue that there's actually more evidence to support the fact that Paul was the one teaching a false gospel. And who's to say, if we're just claiming that if you see an angel and you think you see an angel, or you think you see something from God, it's really a demon and you're being deceived, who's to say that Paul's apparition of Christ on the road to Damascus wasn't actually a demon? You see, it's just a claim that has no basis. It's just pointing fingers and saying, you're wrong, I'm right, and giving no explanation. And whenever somebody has to resort to exclusive claims to authority, like Paul has done here, demanding that people only adhere to their point of view just because, it's usually because their position is inherently weak or insecure, or that what they're teaching is blatantly false. That's just something to keep in mind. And yet Paul's teachings were accepted by the church, and these verses became the basis for centuries of fear-mongering against any sort of spiritual experience outside those mandated by the church. And it's not surprising in many ways that the church favored this interpretation, because it allowed them to gatekeep the spiritual experience. No direct revelation from God could be possible. Only the priesthood were the exclusive authority on what God did and didn't want. Very convenient for them. Sometimes, from time to time, an apparition or an experience could be accepted as legitimate, but only if it could be made to fit within the framework of mainstream church belief and was given the seal of approval by the church authorities. So there's a bit of a history of why everything is demonic, according to the mainstream church. So what's my position? Well, I actually have lived experience in this regard. I have been involved in a lot of different forms of spirituality, particularly Western esoteric spirituality, over the past 20 years. I've done some dumb things as well as some really rewarding things. And I've been in rituals in which both angelic entities have made contact with me and demonic entities have made contact with me. And I know both type of entity very well, and I know that there's a clear difference between them. I'm not going to pretend to know where they came from originally, but I know that there is a clear distinction between them. And even though, yes, it's true, demons can, in a vision or something like that, they can give you a pleasing form and act like they're your friend and that they want to help you. But it's usually pretty glib and superficial and very easy to see through. These demons, when you get to their true nature, they behave a lot more like astral parasites than anything else. Just really awful, parasitic, rabid, really antisocial, unpleasant kinds of creatures. They're not like anything approaching an angel. When an angel communicates with you, it's a very, very different kind of experience. You're clearly dealing with something far in advance of yourself. There's a loving and benevolent presence involved, as well as a clear improvement in your sense of well-being and a deepening of your connection to the spiritual as a result of contact with them. rather than demonic influence, which tends to make your life a lot more neurotic and out of control. And at least in terms of my own experience, and people like Chris Bledsoe, who seem to have had similar experiences to my own, the light beings that I've encountered in the form of orbs, and the angels that I communicated through scrying with, which appear to be the same beings that cause the light orb phenomenon, are undoubtedly angelic. From what I've observed, they are undoubtedly angelic. But other people can have negative experiences with beings that look a lot like these same light beings. I acknowledge that. And so what's happening with our interaction with the phenomenon, which gives rise to UFO and UAP experiences, we have an experience that we can't understand fully, but it seems spiritual. It seems to match the ancient accounts of a spiritual experience. And so then we try and fit that experience into pre-existing categories. Oh, this looks like an angel, this looks like a demon, this looks like a fairy, and so on. But the fact is, we can't say that the UFO experience is one thing or the other. Some people have a positive experience with spiritual seeming UFOs that seems like an angelic encounter. Other encounters with UFOs or aliens seem like encounters with demons, particularly when you think about the Greys and the sorts of things that they do to people. The fact that the appearance of these beings is accompanied by the smell of sulfur. There is definitely a case to be made that there is some kind of intersection between the demonic and some of the UFO phenomenon. I'm not discounting that. But I think it is likely that we are dealing with different types of entities, or perhaps a completely alien phenomenon that we can't put into words, that mirrors our own deepest hopes and fears back to us. Those are a couple of theories or models for the phenomenon. But whatever the case may be, it is obviously wrong and reductive to say that UFOs are demonic, full stop. That's not a good enough explanation. It's too simplistic, it's too dogmatic, and it's just not true. And there's a clear agenda at play from the people who push the UFOs equals demons narrative. And really, it's about government institutions, but also old religious institutions maintaining their monopoly on power, particularly on people's belief structures. And the disclosure moment has come along to challenge pre-existing assumptions about the spiritual world, about humanity's place in the universe, and pushing the demon UFO analogy is a way of trying to get control over that narrative and make it work for a particular belief system. So the fact that powerful people and institutions are involved in twisting the interpretation should set off alarm bells straight away as to how authentic this is as an explanation. But having said all that, now that I think of it, there is one little fact that I think allows us to conclusively know that the UFOs are in fact demonic. And that is this. The UFO beings have been engaging with the US government for decades now. And in all that time, they have not said please or thank you to the US government. Not even once. Therefore, they're demonic. That's it. The UFOs are demonic. It's true. There you have it. So that's it. I hope you liked the video. If you did, please like and subscribe. Join my mailing list again. Hit join or thanks to support me further. And just quickly before I go, I want to plug a couple more things. So I recently did an interview on Ike Baker's Arcanum podcast, which is hopefully up by now. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. That was a fantastic conversation, and it touches upon some of the topics that we've covered in this video. And I'm also going to be doing a Synaxis live stream with Ike, as well as Friday RC and Skylar Mathis in about a week. So keep a lookout for that as well. But that's some of the stuff that's coming up. I hope you enjoyed this video today. Thank you again for listening, and I'll see you next time.